We're going to pull the diesel heater out altogether, and we're going to strip it down and have a look inside it, and if there's any carbon buildup in there, we're going to clean it out, and that will include the minor service, which is just doing it in situ, taking the covers off, checking the glow plug, cleaning out the screen, putting it all back together. We'll do that as well, but we're going to pull the whole thing apart and show you what's inside it and pretty much how simple it actually operates. So I've pulled the heater out. There's 4 bolts, 2 here and 2 here, that hold that heater onto that plate. I'll show you a photo underneath of that thing screwed up and all the plumbing in it attached before we've taken it apart. 2 larger holes are for the exhaust and the air intake, and the smaller hole is for the fuel. There's a rubber seal that sits over the top of that, stops the dust from coming in when you're on the road, and so we'll take that out now somewhere where it's a bit easier to see, and we'll start stripping it down, pulling it apart. We'll see how what it looks like inside. Okay, we've got the heater out of the van and got it on a surface that suits me to work on. So it's about waist height and I'm standing. So the only thing that holds the connection in is this one loom. So disconnect that from the van. There's a brown side to the socket in the van. It stays in the van, part of the loom. It just pulls out to the side, and this will just immediately disconnect. There's the 4 bolts on the bottom, the exhaust, air inlet and fuel. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pull it apart and go through. We're going to strip it right down and a little bit further than what we did just checking the glow plug and the screen. Alright, now we're going to strip this thing down. We take it apart the same as what we did in the van. Take off this top cover. We'll use that, put that to the side, and we'll use that to put our nuts and bolts in. This is the fan. So what happens is the control panel here controls the heater electronically. There's a burn chamber in here, a glow plug chamber in here which ignites the fuel. There's a burn chamber in here where these fins are, and this thing becomes basically a diesel blowtorch. There's no pressure built up in here. It's not like a car engine. It's basically just a diesel blowtorch, and what happens is that the diesel exhaust comes straight out of that hole. There's no valves, there's no camshafts or anything like that, like an engine. It is literally a blowtorch. So what we'll do now is pry off this cover here at the back, which is the cover that's used to plug the ducted pipes in. The fan will draw the air through this side of the heater whilst it's running. This area here where all the fins are is where the burn chamber is. It's going to get really, really hot. So all this is then contained. So the air is going to be drawn past there or pushed past there, pushed past these fins where it takes on the heat, and then straight into the ducting and out into the van. It's a very, very simple process. So we'll take it out of the container that it sits in. These are the 4 bolts that holds it in. The black one hole here is the exhaust, clearly, and this is the air intake, and this one here is the fuel intake into the heater itself. So we'll take that out, put that off to the side, and there you have it. There's a temperature sensor in here at this end. There's the glow plug and the glow plug screen in here, and they all plug into this control module here. You've got blue, green and black. These plugs will not plug in any other hole. They'll only go into the holes that they're supposed to go into, so you don't really need to take any photos or make any notes in relation to those plugs, because you cannot put them in the places where they're not supposed to go. Then we'll start pulling it apart, taking the control module off, separating the fan, which is this end here, from the combustion chamber, and then we'll go and have a look at it and see just how dirty it is. Alright, stripping it down, we're going to take the glow plug out first. It's only a rubber boot that sits in here just to protect it, some dust and crap from getting in there. Disconnect these wires first, get them out of the way. So they're all disconnected. you can take this temperature sensor, take that off, put that away. It just sits on top of a little recess in the top of the burn chamber. When you're taking the glow plug out, force the wires, or push the wires, hold the wires and push that boot along the wires. These things are soldered on to the top of that glow plug. It's not going to take a huge amount of pressure to rip those soldered wires off. So you want to give them a bit of love. The heater itself, when you buy it, it's supposed to come with a socket which has a slotted side on it to go over the wires. I maintain I didn't get one when I bought my heater, but nonetheless, we'll continue on. I made one out of a chainsaw spark plug remover. There shouldn't be a lot of pressure on here. Crack that nut, take the socket off, and gently take that glow plug out. And this is what we do in a short service anyway, or a small service. There's nothing wrong with that glow plug. In fact, it's perfect because it's already been out and cleaned. So there's nothing wrong with that. Inside this this chamber where the glow plug sits and where the fuel goes through, there's a mesh screen, and I've already had that out and cleaned. I'll put up a photo of what it looked like before it was cleaned, and I've pulled that screen out with a bent framing nail and just ground off on the end to make a small hook. Goes through nicely, hooks on the bottom and pulls it out. Depending on how long the services, you're between services, and how hot the unit's got, how long it's been used, etc. You may find that it's quite difficult to get that screen out, and you may find that you damage it beyond use during the process of getting it out. Not a bad idea to have a spare one anyway, in case you get into this position you need to replace it, and they're fairly readily available. They're not a huge amount of money, so it's probably a good idea to have them. These two little pins here, we've taken the screw out of the control module, screw those two pins together, lift that control module out and get it out of the way. Fan assembly here, burn chamber over here. So we've already had this apart, so these screws aren't done up very tight, that are holding the units together. So put those screws over there so we know where they all are. It's a relatively clean working environment here on this piece of foam. So there's a gasket in between the burn chamber and the fan, or the casing for the burn chamber and the fan is a gasket. Be very gentle when you pull these two apart, because the gasket's going to come out on the top of that that rotating fan section inside here, and that's salvageable. There's nothing wrong with that. We'll just give that a bit of a clean and put that back on later. So we'll put that somewhere safe so it doesn't get damaged, and we'll put this section aside. And now we're left with what's the burn chamber. So this area here is where the glow plug goes through this hole and into there, and that's where it seats. And inside that section there is where the glow plug screen sits. And what will happen is that the glow plug will heat up that screen incredibly hot, and when the fuel coming up this pipe here is pumped in, it is atomised through that red hot screen, and it is ignited and goes into this chamber here and comes out the other end as a flame, like a little flamethrower. Once the thing is at temperature and actually running, that glow plug power will be cut off and it will be removed from the combustion process, and it will just end up being like a plumber's torch. The heat will create enough heat to keep the thing going, so it'll just perpetually keep going. So what we'll do, we'll take this burn chamber apart. Once again, another Torx type screw that goes into the end of these. Just one of those annoying things. You've probably got 100 million tools, but now you're going to need 100 million and one. You buy them in a little kit. They come like that. You get 1 million of them in there. So we'll take these screws out of the holding the burn chamber in. And underneath this chamber, underneath this flange that I'm undoing the screws, there's another gasket. This is the gasket that is absolutely going to be cactus. There's very, very little chance that this gasket is going to survive any reasonable amount of use of the diesel heater, because it gets bloody hot and it becomes very, very brittle. I've already replaced mine with a new gasket, but this is the one that came out. We'll put that over there. This is the one that came out. It's very, very, very brittle, and it came out in about 5 parts. It was already cracked when I pulled it out. So these things are about $20, $25 for these gaskets, which is outrageously expensive. But I sourced I think it's a Warmder, or a Warmder, I think, and it's a metal gasket. So we'll try that and see how that goes. So that'll just lift out. There's a grommet here, holds it all together, and there we go. So there's the gasket, comes out. That hasn't been used because we haven't used the heater since it was serviced. There's the fuel line. That's the blowtorch. Fuel comes in here. Glow plug heats it, and it basically just shoots out of there like a blowtorch into these fins. In this internal fins will heat right through to the external fins, and that's what's giving us our heat. There's not a huge amount of carbon in here. It's actually quite clean. There's a little bit of black soot in the burn chamber. It's unlikely that you're ever going to get all that out. That's very clean, actually. It's running very well. Our unit was blowing smoke. I left the service run a little bit longer than I should have, but not long enough to cause it any real damage, or any damage at all. Now it's ready to go again, so we drop that gasket in there, line up the rubber seal here, slide it all back together, and then we just start putting it back together again, the same as in the same sequence in reverse as how we got to this point. So we put the screws back in to the holes from whence they came. Those Warmder, the Warmder gaskets that I'm using this time around, I've not used them before, so jury's out. I'm not sure how they're going to perform. I suspect that they'll be fine, but they are less than half the price of the Eberspacher gaskets. So as far as I'm concerned, I bought 2 of them for $16 for the pair, and Eberspacher gasket is somewhere in the vicinity of $20. So I'm happy to run with these for now, and we'll see how it goes. We'll certainly know whether they're any good when we go to service it next time. Maybe, just maybe, these particular ones might be fine. They might last, and they might go, when you pull it apart next time, they might actually be intact and be able to just put them all back together. So I'll continue putting it together, and then we'll get ready to put it back in. This time I'm going to tension these nuts up, these screws into the heater. I'm going to tension them up now because the heater's going back in as soon as it's back together. It's all been serviced. Doesn't need a huge amount of tension because, as we've said on a couple of occasions, it gets really hot. So you don't want to put too much tension on it because it'll make it very difficult to get apart next time it needs to be pulled apart. So put it up till it bottoms out, and then give it a tiny little nip. And that's it. That's it for that. and then we'll just put it back together in reverse, the way that it came apart, and we're ready to go. So we've cleaned out the exhaust port here. The air intake, of course, is in the other section that's come, which has been pulled apart, which is the fan area. This area here is where the air is drawn in to help with the combustion inside the burn chamber. So what we'll do now is we'll get our little sintered screen, and we'll get our nail, make it a bit easier to put it back in. You get a little tool when you buy these things. If you buy an Eberspacher one, you'll get a little tiny tool that actually puts it into the thread there, down into that chamber, which strangely works almost exactly the same as this framing nail. So then we'll put the glow plug back in. Same rules apply with the glow plug. You don't need a massive amount of tension on that glow plug, because there is no pressure built up in this engine. As you could see before, the burn chamber releases straight out of this hole. There's nothing to stop it, and you can blow through it if you want to. There's certainly no valves or anything in there. Take our little spanner that I had to make, give it a quick, do it up, and we're ready to put the rest of it back together. Glow plug's back in. It's all done up to tension. Now all we've got to do is fit the fan engine, the fan back on. We need that gasket that we've saved, which is a bit of a bonus. This is not going to affect that gasket's not going to affect any of the gases leaking into the van. That section there is open to the fan anyway, and I suspect that's why that particular gasket's serviceable or is savable, because it doesn't get hot up this end of the heater as much as it does at the other end during the burn chamber, which makes that gasket that's in the burn chamber, the silver warmed one that I've put in there, is subject to a fair amount of heat, making it brittle over time. We haven't serviced our heater. The last time we serviced it was about almost 3 years ago, so we've kind of left it probably a little bit longer than what we should have, and that's probably why we were blowing some smoke. There's a video on the on the page in relation to the smoke that our heater was blowing. It was quite funny. We were away up in the lower coast of New South Wales, and I was out one morning. It was quite cold. The heater had just come on, and this bloke came running into camp and was suggesting that our van was on fire and we needed to get everybody out of the van, and but alas, it was just the diesel heater. And the smoke that comes out of the diesel heater when it's going through its startup process is different to what goes on later on. If you're getting smoke coming out of the heater during the startup process, then chances are it's going to be your glow plug screen, and it's a very easy fix. Take it out, clean it, or replace it. In situ, in the van, you don't have to pull the heater apart to do that, and put it all back together, and it should stop the smoking. If it's burning, smoking while it's running, that's a different kettle of fish altogether. You may want to get someone to have a look at it, or as you've seen, it's very easy to pull apart. There is not a lot going on inside it as far as how it works and how it operates. And you're probably just as easy or just as well having a look at it yourself, because you never know, you might find something in there that shouldn't be there, and you can fix it yourself without taking it anywhere. So here we go with these plugs. There's those two, the brown one, and the green one is next. Cannot get them wrong. They cannot go in any other way. They won't fit. But this heat sensor goes in there, and that goes on, holds that in, sits in a little rebate, goes in a little hole, and we're done. Our heater is now back together. It's been tensioned up, and it's ready to go back into its housing and back into the van for another, in our case, couple of years of hassle-free heating. So we put it back into its housing. We use this thing. I use this sort of a system all the time because it makes a lot of sense, and you're not going to get anything. You're not going to end up with parts left over. Every part that I take out of this heater while I'm servicing it goes into the top cover of the heater, and regardless of what I'm doing, I'll use some kind of a container to hold everything. At the end of it, if I've got stuff still sitting in there, then I'm in trouble. In this case, I'm not in trouble because there's nothing in there. So what we do now is we feed that heater back into our housing. There's this gasket that sits in the side there. Okay, so that's in there nicely all together. Make sure nothing's going to pinch. And then hold it up underneath, put the heater top back onto the cover. Which is pretty much the point we were at when we were doing the glow plug service inside the van. Now that's running freely. The fan is running freely inside that housing. It's not rubbing on anything. The tabs have engaged, and we put this air manifold onto the back. That heater is now finished, serviced, ready to go back into the van. In our case, all we needed was to buy a burn chamber gasket. The other gasket was fine, and we've salvaged that, and we bought two, so I don't have to go back and find another one. I didn't, when I went to buy these gaskets, it was only one place, and it was Everything Caravans, which is a caravan repairer, quite well-known caravan repairer in Melbourne, in Clayton or Clayton South, Everything Caravans, and they sell this warmer gear, and it's cheap. Otherwise, you'll get them at pretty much any service agent that sells Dometic gear. They'll probably get them in for you. So we'll put the heater back in, and it's good for another couple of years. So now we're going to put the fan back into the van, the heater back into the van, sorry. So we've got a gasket that needs to go on underneath the heater. I'll just set that down. That's what stops all the dust and that coming through those holes underneath. And we'll flip that heater around, pull the cable out of the way, stick it down through the holes. There's 4 holes underneath, and there's also the air intake, exhaust, and the fuel. So I'll put the screen back onto the air at the back of the heater, and put the ducting back onto the front section. And a screwdriver, and we can do that up. And we're back with the loom. Now this loom sits, you can see that there's a small brown tab which pulls out. That loom can only go in one way, and it's not that one. Yes, it is. It goes in that way. And then that loom, that brown handle pushes back in, clamps back in, and that heater is in and ready to go. So we just need to go down underneath the van and bolt it in, and hook up the exhaust, the air intake and the fuel, and we're done. Now the view from underneath, there's the you've got the air intake here, which goes on to this, the air intake of the heater. You've got the exhaust pipe, goes onto the exhaust of the heater. The fuel line, which is just hanging down here, goes onto the fuel line of the heater itself, and then you've got the 4 bolts that hold the whole thing in. Once they're all hooked up, we can fire up the heater and test it.